Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is Schizoid Angst, and today I'm here with Laura Bustamante. I say it wrong every time. How do I say it?
Laura Bustamante.
Laura Bustamante. Bustamante. Oh my God, I'm so bad. Anyway, point is, we're not here to talk about names. We're here to talk about the human brain, to whatever degree that we're going to discuss it today. Now, I know very little about the human brain. I've learned a couple of things over the years. I've read some stuff. I've picked up bits of literature and usually only associated more to the stuff that I'm currently interested in. One thing I am very interested in is the topic of schizophrenia, or even things like delusion, paranoia, hallucination, things that are generally associated with positive symptoms and the human brain is something that I've been interested in for a long time and would like to learn a little bit more about. So, I do have a question for you, and I know we only have like an hour, so we're going to pack in as much as we can in that hour. So, the first question I have for you is what is the current state of your field in neuroscience regarding the manner in which something like schizophrenia is approached? So within explain oh duh, this is more important. Explain who you are, explain what you do, and and then we can go into the question. That probably would have been a better start. Ignore
Awesome.
me. Go
It's a
ahead.
it's a good start. Yeah, so I got my PhD in neuroscience. And my field that I went into, I'm a postdoctoral fellow now. The field that I was kind of working and went into is called computational psychiatry.
Mhm.
And so the idea, the kind of like basic framework of this field is that you would um, kind of take sophisticated mathematical models and try to describe either behavior or neural activity, or anything that's kind of indicative of psychiatric populations. And so a like really simple example would be like, let's say we have this computer algorithm that learns from rewards. And so it's like a little like you can imagine like a little robot, and it's going around and it's getting a reward, and it's trying to learn, okay, if I did something and I got rewarded, I should do that again. And so we kind of have these basic science kind of little computational models, they're called, that would then, it's like, if I got a reward, then I'll like, and I took a right turn to do that, then I'll take a right turn again. And so they're pretty simple mathematical models, but they're models that have been developed to describe human behavior. And so if we put a person instead of my little imaginary robot in an experiment and we have them make actions, they're also learn from rewards, and we try to make these models approximate what behavior people actually do.
Okay.
And so in parallel to that, there's been the field of kind of neuropsychiatry, clinical research, and maybe you're looking at, a given diagnostic label, and maybe you notice that something in the behavior about how you learn from word might be different. So like one example would be, let's say your environment had both like positive rewards and punishments.
Mhm.
It might be cool if you give your little robot kind of different sensitivity to rewards and punishments. So like punishments in real life can be really bad, right? Like you could die if you make the wrong action. And so maybe you're extra sensitive to punishments, for example.
Mhm.
Well, different people, individuals, are going to differ on how much maybe they're sensitive to and how strongly they learn from rewards and punishments. So that's already, like, we know in psychology about individual differences. What you're trying to do in my subfield of computational psychiatry is, okay, how would I like tweak this robot so that, let's say I observe in this diagnostic label that they're even more sensitive to punishment. And then how would I kind of like tweak the little parameters of this model to capture and describe that behavior? The reason we're interested in doing that is because then you can say, okay, what was the mechanism? What was the process, kind of the latent cause that led to whatever difference in behavior you're observing? So it definitely has a strong emphasis on looking at differences across groups. And I will kind of get into also maybe some of my alternative conceptualizations from the baseline.
Hell yeah.
Individual differences. Anyways, so that's kind of my research field. I don't study rewards. I actually study effort-based decision making, and I can get into that in a minute. But the other aspect of this is that I'm neurodivergent. I have a diagnostic label that I have a very complicated relationship with, I would say. I
Okay.
think probably a lot of us have that
Yeah,
experience.
I was gonna agree.
Yeah.
Diagnostic
But
labels don't exactly tell the whole story half the time. So
yeah, but I would kind of see research about my diagnostic label and the way things were being described. It felt very pathological, very negative. I see definitely and it's so I see the value, and I also, it was really, really hard for me to kind of sit in this space of hearing about, me, my community, the peeps that I know, that I love, the neurodivergent folks kind of being understood through, I think, this particularly pathological lens. And so what I'm really passionate about and what we connected on is kind of using the cool, powerful tools of this, computational approaches and thinking about individual differences, and hopefully also kind of leveraging all that stuff to create tools, therapies, supports for neurodivergent people, while at the same time pushing back against kind of overly simplistic, overly pathologizing kind of frameworks that I think are more like the default, coming from like the legacy of psychiatry.
mhm. And so what you're saying from well, from what I can gather is that some of the work you're doing may be supportive of some of these ideas about separating pathology from neurodivergent kind of or cognition or difference. Like some of these some of the actual studies that you look into, like what sort of answers can you derive from such a place?
Okay, yeah. So there's so I'll just tell you a little bit more about my specific research.
Hmm.
So what I study is called effort-based decision making. And so like a example would be, maybe you're getting home after your day of school. I'll make you a student in this example, and you have some homework, but you could also play video games. How are you going to weigh those different options? What are you going to decide to do? And the kind of theory that we use is something that's super basic. Basically, we think that you consider how much potential payoff you can get. So video games are pretty fun. That's going to be nice in the moment. Doing your homework, getting A's might be, even more valuable, but also how much effort it involves. And so here we can think about cognitive effort, playing video games. Yeah, you're paying attention, but doing your math homework, wow, you really got to focus. You can't really be doing anything else. That's a lot more cognitive effort. And then the idea is that you combine those pieces of information and you compute an expected value. So the rewards minus the cost of how much effort you had to do, and that you're trying to maximize expected value. So maybe you end up with video games because it's kind of that sweet spot. Okay, it's a little bit less valuable, but also it's a little bit less effort. But of course, those decisions are super dynamic. There's a lot of factors that go into them. I also study physical effort decision making. And so there it could be like, are you going to like let your dog out back, or are you going to take them on a walk, right? That's more physical effort, but your dog probably will be less annoying later in the evening or something like this.
Hmm.
So I study individual differences in how much people kind of avoid cognitive effort, or how they just manage these trade-offs in decisions. And so it's certainly the case that some people place kind of a higher, we call it the cost of effort, a higher cost of effort, and some people less so, to the point where maybe they're even effort seekers, like they're ultra marathon runners, and kind of trying to understand that space. Why it's, I think, important and relevant in psychiatry is that when people experience certain symptoms like depression and behavioral apathy, there is evidence in my field showing that it's it's actually like a subjective increase in that cost. There's other theories too, like if you think of anhedonia, that might be that you're kind of downweighting how rewarding the activity is going to be, and both of those things are at play. Okay, so why could the basic science be really helpful here? Well, it could be the reward, it could be the cost, it could be there's a few other factors. But what is it for that individual? And if we could know what it was for that individual that might be kind of holding them back from engaging in valuable goal-oriented activities, then maybe we could do something that's more targeted. So kind of thinking about, if you're doing medication placement, if you're trying different types of therapies, therapy assignments, or also like apps, tools. I don't research exactly how you, I'm not a clinician. I don't go through the therapies, but I think there's, a lot of, for example, like who's going to benefit from behavioral activation therapy, which is like literally like go on a walk, do your laundry, and kind of trying to scaffold. So anyways, I kind of think of myself as someone who wants to help people achieve their goals, whatever the goals are. And I think that also if people do understand a little bit more, also kind of like in a psychoeducation thing, a little bit more about how their brain is making those decisions, they might be able to get some insights that also can help them be a little bit more flexible with their behavior.
Interesting. Okay, sorry, I got lost in thought because it's just like I'm thinking of so many different things in association with it. I kind of want to ask the next question that I had, but I also kind of I have like sub questions that kind of popped into my head as we were talking. But I think I could work it in all together because the next question I really had was within that same field. Are words, or at least within your field, are words like neurodivergent or even such things even considered? Or if they are considered, like say, let's just say something more common than like the neurodivergency I generally speak about, which is schizo-spectrum stuff, would be like autism, right? So autism is a little more of a popular thing that is discussed. So how something like autism taking into account when some of these behavioral sort of studies and experiments and everything else are being done? Is it being taken into account?
Right. Okay, so I guess with the neurodivergence thing, I read a blog by Judy Singer kind of recently that was trying to point out that neurodiversity is not scientific, it's political, social activism. And so I think that when I'm in the default of my field, we really are in the kind of medical conceptualization. I've seen a little bit of joining of worlds of psychologists starting to use that term. But at the same time, I'm actually not sure that it's I was like really into using it, and then I got kind of confused and thought maybe neurodiversity is a little bit more about this like social society political activism aspect. And maybe I think it's really important that people are able to opt in or opt out into the medical approach to psychiatric symptoms. But I think within this field there's I mean, the medical framework is what we're working with. And I think that's why it's really hard for me to sit there. With autism, I think that's like one of the most kind of really shining and leading examples of a community saying, no, how you're describing us is not my experience. This is closer to our experience, kind of challenging the researchers. And there's big, there's a lot happening in that area. And so one of the things that I'm like super interested, and why I was really excited to connect with you and maybe other people who will like listen to this and are in your community is, I, having lived experience, really want to connect with other people with lived experience and ask them, what is it for you? And of course, clinicians do connect with, the populations that they serve, but they're connecting with the people that come to get medical care in the medical care context. And so really trying to understand in a very holistic way, like, what is kind of the divergent thinking and what's going to capture, can we look for strengths? Can we think not only just focusing on what's different and what's kind of the challenges, but also, what's shared and what's also kind of the strengths, and how can you kind of use this a really personalized individual approach based on learning more individual differences stuff, which is what I do, to actually like bootstrap the right solution, so you don't give neurotypical solutions to neurodivergent people. So
yeah, that was the other part of it that I think was important, right? I understand what you mean about how these labels are often used as like social dynamic sort of advocacy movements. I'm an advocate. I guess I would consider myself that. I wouldn't have considered myself that long ago, not that long ago. I mean, because I have problems with the term itself and everything else that's connected to it, and some of the issues and how it gets problematic and all this kind of shit when you're using terms like that, right? Oh, by the way, I'll drop an occasional curse word during my interviews. I hope you're okay with that.
calm down.
Okay, good. Because I don't like censoring that kind of sort of stuff. I think bad language is a part of the human experience. Um, so, but this is one of the things that I find difficult though, is okay, if we're talking reward systems, right? If we're talking about behaviors, it's kind of like what you were saying, reward or effort in your case, right? More focused. What I wonder though is if a person has an entirely different perception of how they interact with their external world, right? So their priorities, their values, their intuition essentially toward how they approach the world, and what are the motivating factors for them, what keeps them going, what rewards them, is so fundamentally different that or an outlier kind of way of experiencing things. How can wouldn't it require this a similar studies like the ones you're describing to be done specifically on those people to actually understand the way their reward systems or their effort cognitive function like systems and everything else function? Like, wouldn't it require a separate kind of set of studies?
And like perspective and like taking into the account those factors, absolutely. And I think that that is something that I also really kind of encourage, even if so like you will see for certain psychiatric groups that people with those labels that are coming into studies that, for example, they'll be avoiding effort more strongly in these little simple laboratory tasks. And so that's the case in schizophrenia. I saw a study in schizotypy and it was like kind of mixed. It wasn't as certain. There's been some evidence in depression, and I think this is like when people are symptomatic with. And what's so important to remember is that this is a really specific instance of that you've come into a laboratory, you're doing like a dinky task where maybe you have to press a button or do a little cognitive task, and okay, how motivated are you to try to do so excellent at whatever, doing effort in this task? And like you said, I think maybe for kind of the undergraduate student population, that's kind of the run-of-mill where we make these tasks, maybe it's enough for them that they want the experimenter to like think that they're really swell, or they want to like they have a certain image of themselves that they're tackle challenges or whatever. We kind of tend to just port those tasks and just say, okay, look, we did it in the undergrads and this is how they behave, and let me make that direct comparison. And I think what you highlighted, which is so great, is, well, what is rewarding in this population? What are the things that get you motivated? And I think that even someone who's going to come into the lab and maybe they're like avoiding more effort, you still have to think about all of the factors in their daily life that are kind of contributing to these decisions. There's cool studies that are more experience-based sampling. They're on the mobile phone and people tell you what they're doing. And I think that could be something promising. But I think exactly what you're saying of identifying for that individual person or for that group of people, what are how does this process work for them? And it's not
Mhm.
necessarily just going to be a mirror image of how it is in the, kind of I don't know if the undergraduates are neurotypical, but
No. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and I think there's actually a really great parallel with that with developmental studies, where a lot of times people will say, oh, let's just take the exact model that we thought adults are using and just apply it to kids. And no, it doesn't really work. You have to tailor it.
God
You
no.
have to, right, you have to take that group as they are and rethink it. And I think that that's something the field has the potential to do, but I think it is really an oversight very often because, like you said, if you're not coming from that group and you don't spend a lot of time listening, learning, being in touch with the experiences, well, the most easy thing you're going to do is just take something off the shelf and translate it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, because when how in your opinion, okay, so based on what you just said, what I'm gathering is that there's a lot of context. There's a lot of nuance that isn't being considered because there's so much, right? So, in other words, if you get a sample of 500 people, you're still going to have the issue of like, well, what if like 30 of those people have childhood trauma of this kind? And what if 20 of those people have neglect? And what if, and so there's going to be, or what if they're from this culture or this nation or this, like there's so many factors that could affect um things like behavior, right? And things like like reward systems and things like effort-based things, right? You might be someone from a household that would look down upon putting too much effort in a certain type of activity, but look
Yep.
highly upon putting effort into another, right? So
Yeah.
so all those factors are definitely important. But my question for you is something like, well, brain structure or the manner in which the cognitive style in which that person is interacting with like in many ways and with almost physical reality or just the way they perceive physical reality, would you say that that factor would be far more important to delineate when doing studies like this? If you're gonna like if you're gonna be taking into account anything, is that something that you think is a great value to do so with? If we can't take into account everything, right?
Right. I do think it's of great value. And I also think it's like one of probably the more challenging tasks to take on. I want to reinforce your point about cultural differences. There's this really beautiful study. I'll summarize it very quickly that just came out. Uh, One of the authors is Yuko Munakata, who
Beautiful study, by the way. You're amongst nerds when you say, "I saw this beautiful study," like a work of
uh,
art, right? Go ahead.
okay. So you might have heard about the marshmallow task, which was like you have little kids and you tell them, okay, you can have a marshmallow. I'm going to leave the room. When I come back, have 2 marshmallows. And then the kids who waited for the second marshmallow, they followed them for 30 years. This was Walter Mischel. And then 30 years later, they had better academics and they were less arrests and they made more money. And it was like all this stuff. And we were like, wow, the kids who can delay gratification, like, look how fabulous that skill is. And it really kind of reinforced this kind of, I think, hierarchy of, cognitive function or self-control or whatever it is. So um, these researchers who were kind of collaborating between American and Japanese uh, universities. Basically one of them went on sabbatical and kind of noticed that there were certain differences in, I think, like what you said, when the culture rewards self-regulation and when it doesn't. And so, for example, in Japan, according to the talk I saw, it's more normal to have to wait to eat the food. You'll have food in front of you, but until everyone's seated and everyone's served, there's no eating it. And then again, like if it's time for dessert, until everyone finished their main, no one's eating dessert. And so kids are getting a lot of experience with waiting for food. But when it comes to gifts, adults will just more often come and give them a gift and they open it right away. In American kids, it might be more common that you can kind of like eat the food, or when you move on from the main to the dessert, you can eat it. But with gifts, you have a lot of experience, a Christmas tree, birthday parties where the gifts are there and you can't touch them for a long time. Okay, so what they did is they repeated that marshmallow experiment. So they did it with Japanese and American kids. And, you know, the American kids were like the original Marshmallow Study. Some of them could wait, some of them couldn't wait, or chose not to wait. The Japanese kids, like basically all of them could wait the 15 minutes for the second marshmallow. Then so if you just stopped right there, you'd be like, wow, Japanese kids have more self-regulation than American kids.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you look at they did the same thing but with a gift, one gift now or two gifts later. And when you look, the American kids can all wait 15 minutes for the gift, and the Japanese kids you know, were like the American kids with the food. Some of them waited and some of them didn't, and it's a mixture. And so these cultural differences are rarely, if ever, captured in psychology experiments. And the kind of new proposal they made about how you can think about that old Walter Mischel data is that you probably had basically the kids who were doing the best in this, you know, cohort of, I'm pretty sure, American kids were probably from the dominant culture where, you know, the self-regulation that you're taught as a kid also is applying all through life. And that kids who were not doing that probably just had a different background. They would be self-regulated in a different area, but not in this area. And that maybe they also were existing in the had a non-dominant culture that led to other life outcomes. And so really what you were measuring were these like cultural differences. Anyways,
Yeah.
all that to say that I think it's something I'm really excited about is to try to, and I mean, neurodivergence is a culture too, and disability is a culture too. And
Mm-hmm.
what I'm really excited about is trying to just bring that extra nuance into this research, still leverage what's useful there, but also kind of remember that, you know, just because you did this way in this task in this little laboratory experiment, that doesn't speak to the whole breadth and depth
Yeah.
of experience that you have.
Of a human experience, especially when we're talking about this. And it's just funny because like even the term neurodivergency and things like that, I honestly personally and in my own efforts, I just use it for practical. It's like a pragmatic thing as far as like categorization and trying to like basically have a conversation on the topic itself. Um I I don't like, it's funny because like for example, I don't really align myself with the kind of overarching sort of notion of neurodivergent, you know, umbrella kind of thing that's often like being brought up on the internet and stuff. All I see oftentimes is that there's an overarching issue, right, in regards to how varying forms of cognition are not being taken into account when the variety aspects of just of the way society manages itself, right, and the progress that could be made if such things were to be integrated more efficiently. So like that's kind of like where my approach is generally coming from. And so it's really funny because like sometimes I see the more like really advocacy focused, politically advocacy focused versions of this, and I'm very not interested in it. Like a lot of the times I'm just like, okay, but how can we apply this to science? Like how can we apply this to studies, to research, to things of that nature, right? And then what can we discover from that? And what sort of decision making can we like change or whatever pertaining to how we approach very like everyday or practical things, or the manner in which we apply research, and how do we separate prescriptive from descriptive and blah 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 and causality, and like that's the kind of stuff that just I'm fascinated with, that isn't really it's not usually the biggest priority for those that are kind of advocates in a lot of this stuff. They're more looking for, you know, acceptance and understanding, and I'm totally cool with that because I think it's definitely of great value. It's just that I don't think acceptance and understanding is alone. I mean, enough is alone is good.
Mhm.
Man, I can't speak today. Is enough by itself, right? It has to be We have to, like, get into the nitty gritty of why these things function like they do, and get into the reality, in a sense, of why they do. And that's why I'm so interested in the research that you do, because it's actually taking those parameters into account. I have another question, though. This one might be, I wouldn't say it. I would say this question is definitely of a less scientific nature, um, but I think it's still incredibly relevant. Now, and this is a question I'd actually like to ask any kind of researcher that's been kind of heavily into anything like this. Uh, what do you believe motivates a lot of the decision making when it comes to the type of research, or the research that is being funded, is being grants are being given to it, that is being basically pushed for, that's trending, whatever you want to call it, right? What do you think is the most potent motivating factor? Since we're talking about effort and reward, right? What is the effort and reward system of the academic, that is, or the researcher, that motivates them towards specific fields or sections or subsections of research, and who's paying for all of this, and what's motivating them to pay for what? You know what I'm saying? Because, like, I feel like oftentimes research is being dictated by, like, these kind of weird sort of puppet strings of money, and
Right.
social status and hierarchy, and right, like, because even academics want to, like, climb the social hierarchy sometimes, right? They're interested in that. Even academics want to make a lot of money, or they want the big grants, or they want the big attention, and what have you seen of that kind of stuff in your field,
Yeah,
without
so
outing anyone or anything?
no,
You don't have to talk about
I
it.
I
Yeah.
definitely I don't have like I don't think like a kind of deep insider. I'm pretty fresh out of grad school. So
No,
I
I
think
know,
that
but just your
my
ideas.
no, but I think that, one thing that's pretty interesting about my research field when I've been talking about these kind of computational models of behavior is that this is very much in the space of artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
So um I think the artificial intelligence, like all of the psychology that can become more mathematical and be applied in these very computer ways, is extremely heavily emphasized. Um, how much that is like towards any particularly useful purpose, I don't know. I mean, I know, for example, like a Tesla runs off of like stuff that psychologists discovered, neural networks. And so I definitely see that. And then I think in the clinical realm, of course, there's a ton of money from the National Institutes of Health. And I guess that's for all of the reasons that people care about medical stuff. So those are the two spaces that I'm in. And I do usually feel like it's kind of just going with the flow of like what's replicating and like what's novel. And if someone doesn't have a good reason that they can tell you, why does your research matter? What are you going to apply this to? Like who does this help in the real world, or what can this actually be used for? People are not interested in that research, and you're not getting a grant. Like people definitely have to make compelling cases about what they're going to do. The degree to which any of those things really get done, I think, is often like very out of the hands of the researcher, because it's more, I mean, I already told you, I was like, oh, you could like assign therapies or something. I'm not ever going to do that. And so I think it's really kind of this combination between like being able to weave like a good future tale, and then also being like close enough to what's already being found and a little bit distinct. And so I think it's like all subject to a lot of the same social dynamics that the rest of society is dealing with. But I will say, like, if you're going to get a huge, NIH grant, multi-million dollars, like you're doing some legit, you got to have that stuff be backed up for sure. So I think, yeah, I don't know. That's
No,
my thought.
okay, all right, that's just fine.
Yeah.
The other question I had, now we can get back to the science portion of things. The other question I also had was, have you what have you heard regarding schizophrenia or anything of that nature, in regards to the type of research that you do, and that sort of thing? So I would like to learn a little bit about that, if you have discovered anything.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So there, so I mean, at the very start, you were talking about positive symptoms like
Mhm.
hallucinations or delusions, and that stuff I know very little about. The negative symptoms, which are, things that are kind of reduced,
The anhedonia and stuff like
right?
that.
Apathy and anhedonia, that's what I
Evolution.
know more about.
Okay, yeah, well, that's fine. It's all part of it. So,
Yeah. And
sure.
so it has definitely been the case in like enough studies that I think it's probably like, people have a bit of a consensus about this, that in laboratory studies, when participants with schizophrenia are coming in, they're making fewer hard task choices or some more avoidance of effort. Now, why? What's underlying that? The idea, and then it'll be correlating. So with certain symptoms, like how much apathy, or, maybe you do a clinical interview and you are kind of saying, okay, how much like social apathy are you having? Like, are you connecting with friends or family or whatever? And if you're really not, if you're very isolated, maybe that would like indicate high social apathy. Or behavioral apathy, are you like going and doing things, are you volunteering, are you whatever. And I've been watching a lot of these clinical interviews, and it's extremely strange to me, but I do understand kind of hearing people's like very full description of what's going on in their lives boiled down to these numbers about like how much apathy. And it's kind of like, it'll literally be like, how did they say that they did like 2 activities this week, 2 enjoyable activities, or like 4 enjoyable activities, or and kind of it all gets down to this very numerical thing. But nonetheless, there are kind of these relationships where I think if people are experiencing apathy, then they'll also be making doing more effort avoidance. I think what's extremely important, and probably what people can take away from this, is like, well, what was causing the apathy? What in your environment, in your social life, right? Why are you not, the social apathy thing? Well, maybe you have a really challenging relationship with your family, and that's why you're not calling your family. Or, with the behavioral apathy, like maybe like, something like there's this concept of, I mean, you've probably heard this word too, but of efficacy. And
Mhm.
so this is like, if I exert effort, is it even going to give me that payoff?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
in theory, if I do my math homework, I'll like get a good grade. But if my teacher hates me and has it out for me, then, it doesn't matter if I try. And that type of thing is especially demotivating. And so if people are kind of consistently in these situations where they have low efficacy, they're trying, and then it doesn't kind of give them the payoff,
Hmm.
that's going to cause you to exert less effort.
For
And I
future
think
tasks and
on
future
future
activity.
you're kind of, and it's a lifelong learning process too. And so I think you were talking about kind of like early experiences, and so you're creating these certain kind of like priors, we call them, or kind of like biases about, when is it going to be worth it. I think what's really important is that there is, for every person, the times where it is worth it. Maybe you have a
Yeah,
special interest,
yeah.
you love to learn about some topic.
Mhm.
And I think that what we I mean, if I could like wave a magic wand and change the education system and also work, honestly, I think what we really, really miss out on is letting people set their own goals
Mhm.
and go towards those goals. And basically, in my research, it's like super research field, it's super clear that your brain is always deciding what it wants to do. What goal do I want? How much effort am I going to put towards it? And when it's coming from inside, intrinsic motivation, then there's also processes where you get little dopamine bursts for progress towards the goal. So if it's genuinely your own goal, I think you will make that effort. You will. I think what happens so often is that goals are imposed on you. So a teacher
Mhm.
says, you have to go read this, right? It's not, you could read any topic. You have to read this specific thing. If that's not in line with your decision-making system, it's going to feel so effortful. I mean, you're literally fighting against your motivational system.
Mhm.
And I think that we ask people to do that so often. And that if we could, for example, make really a lot of project-based learning. So like, okay, like obviously we're doing math is the topic, but like trying to get them to like try to do something like make a, I don't know, I'm not a teacher, but kind of let the person set a goal, and then the math lessons can go like towards the service of that. And so anyways, I think that we're so often just wasting time and energy, and ultimately also teaching people kind of to devalue effort when we don't let them apply their effort towards a legitimate goal that they have. And so I think for anyone, even if there's someone who's going to come into the lab and they're not going to do this arbitrary task that they're being given, I think that really trying to be in tune with, and like you said, what does make me, feel that energy to go do something, and what are, for me as an individual, putting aside how it works for any other person that what gets me up and doing something that, effort is valuable. Effort helps you reach goals. So it's good to engage it, but it has to be about a goal that you care about. And I think so often, and even in the laboratory, that is being, we're not tapping into that enough as a society. So
Absolutely agree. And well, not to get a little grim, right, or bleak, but a lot of my audience tends to be grim and bleak, because if you're a schizoid, you know about grim and bleak. Because I say that because oftentimes it feels like our entire lives seem exist without this efficacy.
yeah.
Like there exists without a reward system. And generally speaking, the assumption by many people is that schizoids just lack a reward system or the ability to have a reward system, right? I argue, or I posit, that they just merely are being given activities and tasks and rewards that make sense to them, or that they
Yes.
even give a shit about. And it's really funny because that's often what I hear when I know it's anecdotal stuff from many schizoids that I talk to, but what I hear is, why did I want to complete that task? It will ultimately give me nothing I want. The things I want aren't what people care about.
Yes.
The things I want aren't achieved through interpersonal communication or climbing. Uh, People's goals don't align with my goals. So why make friends? Why have a relationship if ultimately they have very different goals than I do, and my goals will be overlooked or won't make sense to others? That's what I keep hearing over and over
Yes.
and over amongst schizoids and even schizotypals and people like that, and even autistic people, right? They start developing similar sort of I forgot what you termed it, but futures or priors. What did you?
Priors, yeah, you
Yeah,
could say priors, yeah.
priors. I think it was priors or something. Yeah, but even autistic people go through the same kind of um cycle, right? They find a group, they think, oh, we have a mutual interest of a certain thing of another, and once it starts leaving the realm of the interest, then a lot of the goals stop being aligned, a lot of the rewards start changing, and so on and so forth, and then all of a sudden they're alienated, they feel alienated from the entire system, and then whatever goals are being presented are just uninteresting and unmotivating, right? And it's just tragic because I feel that such goals could be presented whilst not inhibiting or the goals of the general the general population that might be motivated by the. So I think just taking into consideration new goals towards specific people might actually generate incredibly productive, incredibly effective people at a variety of tasks. So, like, yeah, I guess an easy way to put it would be like, if your goal in talking to people or conversation is to gather more knowledge on a topic and not to make friends, that shouldn't be a problem. Right?
Yes.
Because maybe making friends on a conventional sense is not what you're seeking as a reward. You want information, and you want more people in your life that have information you're interested in, and you want to share the information that's in you.
Yeah.
And that makes you feel good. That gives you dopamine. That gives you the things that motivate you to get up in the morning, right? So, I mean, how? What are your thoughts on a
Yeah.
person that's living their life this way, like I have, and without these goals, where the world seems essentially that bleak?
Yeah, yeah. I'm like snaps for that, because I think the extra level there too is that you're also told it's wrong to be like that.
Oh,
You know,
you're going even more bleak.
you get these
Jeez.
messages that
Mm-hmm.
also tell you that, whatever you did that didn't adhere means that there's something wrong with you. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that also, you know, that that can cut really deep.
I believe
I
the
feel like
empty
we all get
core,
it, but
or the disassociation to identity that's often comes with this territory, and the empty core that comes with this territory is something that's developed
yeah,
by external factors, not something that's innate,
yeah, yeah,
because of what you're saying.
yeah. So I definitely think that this is where kind of the neurodiversity, kind of the types of changes that that movement is going to be arguing for are so critical. And I think that this, it's like, I just agree so deeply that, okay, one, I really think that in the research, that if you could start to, and let's say, let's go into the neurodiversity idea of the neurotypes, right? You have some people who kind of have clusters of more similar cognitive styles,
Mhm.
that, if you're researching like certain groups, that trying to under like even like qualitatively, like trying to understand what are the motivating factors, and then bootstrapping off of that and saying, okay, great, this is what you're motivated by, and that's awesome, and let's feed that and let's grow that, and that's going to turn into something good. And something that I feel like I've really seen is when we're in school as kids and it's very one size fits all, like there's one way that you're supposed to be,
Mhm.
and then whatever, people get grades or whatever. When you go see people do their adult careers, it's like, who cares? It doesn't matter what grades they were getting. Usually people have really, careers, found some little thing that they're passionate about, and then they're down to think about it a lot and develop expertise. And then, for some people, maybe they can monetize that. And if they can't, that's, I think, another thing that the neurodiversity and kind of disability movements would have something to say about, kind of making space for that. But I think that, we are really doing a disservice to neurodivergent people, whatever labels that we're talking about, when we try to push these kind of, what is a correct goal onto people. And
Mhm.
I think that it really does, like you were saying, teach you, because then you're like, oh, I must be, the word lazy, right? Oh, I must be lazy,
We're
but I
still
never,
cursed, broken,
right.
just an idiot,
Yeah,
a
right. So
busted human.
I don't do my like math homework, and oh, I'm lazy, right? And that's really, I think, when people, for example, can kind of come to greater self-acceptance. And I think for me, the reason I really like the term neurodivergence is because it really helped me kind of say, like, let me flip this pathology narrative. And I still kind of struggle sometimes to, I'm in that dialectic of saying, no, I don't accept that way of thinking about myself. I just have a different style. And anyways, I think when we actually can empower people to use their style, do things on their own time, do things that are goals that they actually care about, and have them search for that intrinsic motivation and follow it, that's the best for everyone, also in society, also in, and I think it's really sad when there are missed opportunities there for all the reasons that you talked about. But
Mhm.
as a researcher, I think it would be really powerful to kind of even be able to say, for, like people who are educators or caregivers or whatever, or the individuals themselves in neurodivergent groups, okay, well, maybe this strategy, this type of goal is like not commonly motivating for this like group, but you can try like another type of goal. Or for some reason now, kind of the persistent drive for autonomy, like the PDA group, is kind of coming to me of It's like, why can't you just like get like autonomy? And I also feel like almost the neurodivergent kids are, they're telling you, they're screaming it at you, I don't want to do this doesn't work for me. And then the approach is like, how do we like force them to get them to do it instead of
Oh yeah.
looking productively for what does work. And I think another thing that I really love about what you're doing is when I've been able to connect with people with, my neurotype, my label, I'm like the coolest person in the group and they're the coolest, and and it's so, the way that we talk and the interruptions and the speed all just like work so seamlessly, and I kind of lose that self-consciousness. And I think, you know the sooner that people can connect with others that are like them, also the more that they can kind of say, oh look, that my friend kind of does it that way, like let me check that out. And I think often childhood is like kind of one of the most isolating times for that, where if you just don't happen to have like a buddy at school or something, that you're always making these references to people that have really different cognitive processing styles from you.
Yeah, it's gonna be a real lonely experience. Let's just say from experience, I can tell you that is indefinitely the case.
Yeah.
And then all of that culminates into what oftentimes can be termed into maladaptations
Yeah.
that ultimately become very ego dystonic for the individual as they get older.
Yeah.
Um, I did want to, I know we have to wrap up soon here, but I did have another related question. As you were speaking, it like popped into my head. Oh God. And now it's gone. Now it's gone. Oh, it was
I
something,
said a
it was
lot.
something solid though. It was something so important, like that had to do with, oh, here we go. I have it. Okay. I just wanted your thought on this, right?
Yeah.
Actually. So as you were talking about what you just had, and then I thought back at what you mentioned about how when you're trying to get research done, you need to be able to pitch it, you need to be able to sell it, right? How is this pragmatic? How is this practical, right? What's the bottom line here, right? It's almost like a Shark Tank situation, right? Where you're just like, okay, so if we, and I honestly, I get bothered by that whole idea too, because I'm kind of if you know anything about Tesla, like the actual guy, Nikola Tesla, he had the mentality, and something I really respected about the guy is he had the mentality of we'll discover what's important about something by asking questions and doing like seemingly aimless research,
Yeah.
right? Like so he thought, oh, we don't have the answer to this. Let's find out. And it's like, and then people around him would go, well, what's the point of learning that? It's not going to achieve anything new, right? It's just going to be some new factoid. And then he'd be like, well, you don't know. Maybe it'll be useful later, and so he almost became like a hoarder of little bits and pieces of knowledge, and he would make a lot of extra effort to where other people were going like, why are you putting so much energy into this? It's only going to culminate into some new small piece of information. And he was thinking like 10 steps ahead. And oftentimes they would go back and they would be like, that's that thing that we thought was dumb and useless. Now it's useful. And he's like, yes.
Mhm.
So the way I would pitch is okay. I would say, well, if you have different people, if you have neurodivergent people that have different reward and motivations and effort-based systems, that also means that the things they will put more effort into, right? If they have different reward systems, the things they will put more effort into gladly and consistently are going to be different than the ones of the conventional neurotypical person, right? So then that means they are more well suited to do specific activities or actions, right? Because it's running in conjunction with what motivates them more
Mhm.
commonly, right?
Yes.
So, in other words, like certain types of work, certain types of stuff that would be considered, say, very isolating, right? Or very this or very that the average person would not want to really do because it's too much for them, or it's not, so there's no people, there's not enough social stuff, or the conversations are there, or there's no cities, or there's no entertainment centers, or that sort of work, that kind of research that would put you in that kind of place. would be ideal for certain types of neurodivergent people, right? And so it's like, if we reward these people, we now have a practical use for understanding the reward systems, because then now we know where the effort is, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it's like, oh, okay, well, and they're kind of experimenting with that a little bit, especially in the AI and the tech world. They're like have programs for hiring autistic people and things like
Right.
that, because they're kind of discovering like some of this stuff. Like I've talked to other schizoids where they go, well, some bosses, they've had kind of discovered that about them, that it's useful, because they're like, oh, this employee or this person will just sit at home and do the work and not complain and not get into drama and not cause any problems at all within the interpersonal space, because they're so uninterested in it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they're just sitting there doing their work and their job, and they're really efficient at it because they want to finish it, get it done, and go back to playing their video games or doing their art, right? And they're not like wasting time talking, and they're not wasting time like socializing, because and not because they're being forced to not, but because they're just not,
Yeah.
no, it's not what they want to do. They just want to do their work.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that, just very quickly? Like, do you think that's a good like pitch for why this research is important?
Um, I definitely think that that type of enhanced understanding, strengths-based understanding, finding the niche, what works for you, going with that, workplaces that give you the flexibility to go with what works for you are all excellent. And I do think that research can help kind of maybe
Convince
guide
them.
some of that. Right. Yeah, it's
They need
true. I feel
authoritative
like so
stuff, right?
often, like the science is just like so that you can say something that you already knew. But
Follow
anyway,
the science. So you could say that
yeah,
to those people or something like
so
that.
I think that's awesome. I definitely also kind of, and I'm sure you agree, think, we don't want to end up distilling people down to like
No,
their,
no, no. We don't want to exploit people.
but
No, no,
we're
for
together
sure.
on
Yeah,
that. But no, I
yeah,
mean, there's this concept, it probably has to be the last thing I say for this
yeah.
time, but there's this concept that I really love by this Canadian researcher named Mickey Inslicht. I don't think he made it up, but anyways, he made this scale for it called meaningfulness of effort.
Mhm.
And basically, when you have something in your life that is a goal, that is effort that you put into and you build and you grow something and you kind of accomplish goals, that's really psychologically healthy. And when you don't have meaningfulness of effort, and for example, like you do a super repetitive task at work or that's associated with depression. And that's what the research that I'm thinking of was showing. And I think that everyone deserves to have a meaningful effort. I don't think that I really do not subscribe to laziness, and I think it's very, very, very often these mismatches between the individual and what's being asked of them. And I think everyone having something in their life that's a meaningful effort is like so valuable, and I really do hope that we increasingly can, make that a reality for more people, especially neurodivergent people.
No, no, that explains why I'm depressed all the time. I keep engaging in things that don't have meaningful effort,
Well,
unfortunately.
I bet you that doing this
Yeah, this
show,
is definitely one
spreading
of the
your
things that does
community,
have meaningful effort. So I'm
exactly,
glad for that. I think it keeps
yeah,
me chugging along just nicely for
exactly.
now.
So,
So
and I hope that everyone can kind of find their thing.
same, same. Well, thank you for being here today. I appreciate the time you've taken. Hopefully, if you're ever interested in going in more depth into future questions at a future date when you have more time, we can do something like this again.
Absolutely, and if peeps have questions and want to put them in,
Comments,
we can
yeah, or
answer.
actually follow you on Twitter.
That's
So
true. I
I'll put a link to your Twitter
Okay,
in my description.
awesome.
So they can follow you on Twitter and they can ask you questions there too. And
All
see what you
right.
post and all that kind of stuff, and whatever other links you would want me to post. Okay. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
peeps.
Have an awesome evening or night or whatever.